of the Mexican community in La 18, also known as Pilsen. And from the very first day, they presented bilingual first voice exhibitions and cultural events. To this day, we continue true with that. We continue telling our history through our creative community of artists, of writers, of poets, and musicians. And I just want to say that in this room that we're in today, many people from both sides of the border have come and presented here. People such as Octavio Paz, Carlos Fuentes, Rigoberta Menchú, Luis Alberto Urrea, Sandra Cisneros, Isabel Allende, Ana Castillo, Tomás Ibarra Frausto, Guillermo Gómez Peña, Linda Carter, and musicians like Las Cafeteras, Carla Morrison, Julieta Venega, Eliguera, on and on and on. So this is a very special space. It used to be a boathouse at one point, and now it certainly is so much more for us and for our community. And with that, I would like to invite the Executive Director of the U.S. Latinx Art Forum up, Josh Franco.
Thank you, Cesáreo. I'll say Guillermo Gomez Peña, one of those who's been in this room, is a Latinx Artist Fellow. And I am tall and so fortunate to get to come here relatively often. I always feel the warmth and the history in this room, in this building, and love seeing the art. As Cesáreo said, my name is Josh Franco. I'm Executive Director of the U.S. Latinx Art Forum, otherwise known as USLAF. Want to try to say it with me? USLAF? Thank you. We will add umlauts to our acronym one day to help. But today I'm delighted to welcome you to Lines of Descent, which marks our fifth and final conversation in the X's Intersection program series for 2025-26, and indeed our last in the series, but more exciting things to come. The series gathers recipients of the Latinx Artist Fellowship into conversation with each other, along with curators and other engaged thinkers, in order to examine the rich conceptual and intellectual intersections throughout their practices. This year's programming series marks the culmination of the fellowship, which has awarded unrestricted awards of $50,000 to 75 artists over the last 5 years. For those of you who may not be familiar with our work, USLAF is a gathering place for those interested in art by U.S. inhabitants of Latinx descent. Hanging out here builds relationships within and beyond hemispheric American art that result in new exhibitions, scholarships, programs, and more. We're proud to look back on a decade of programming and initiatives that have fostered a dynamic community of artists and interlocutors, which not only includes this series, but also Writing on Latinx Art, a digital publishing initiative that launched in 2024 to commission short-form essays on the work of Latinx Artist Fellowship recipients. I definitely encourage you to check that out, especially if you're a teacher. They're accessible, wonderful, peer-reviewed, rigorous writings on our artists. We invite you to join us as we step towards USLAF's future by making a donation to our ongoing work. To learn more, please visit our website at uslaf.org, uslaf.org. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the co-moderators for this conversation. Welcoming back Cesáreo Moreno to the stage, Visual Arts Director and Chief Curator at the National Museum of Mexican Art, and Mary Thomas, my partner in crime, Deputy Director of the U.S. Latinx Art Forum. Thank
you. I'm short. Can you all hear me all right? Okay. It's a pleasure to welcome you all this evening. We're so excited to bring Santa Barraza, Marcus Chormicle, and Shizu Saldamando into conversation with each other. As Josh mentioned, tonight's panel marks the final event in our X's Intersection series, which has taken place over the last 5 years in conjunction with the fellowship program. We're especially grateful to the National Museum of Mexican Art and their incredible team for their collaboration over the last 5 years. And it's particularly poignant to close this series by holding this panel in person at the museum for the first time. The thematic frame for tonight's conversation initially took shape around an interest in how each of tonight's artists engage with questions of inheritance and lineage within their practices on both ancestral and aesthetic levels. As we started talking and following this shared thread together, we started thinking about the significance of land and region to these questions as well, and what it means to belong to a place, especially when that belonging has been contested and reinscribed throughout history. There's much more that I could say, but I'll leave it to the artists. To give you a sense of how tonight's program will unfold, we'll begin with short presentations by each of our panelists that offer a glimpse into how their practice intersects with these thematics. We'll leave space for questions and crosstalk from the panelists and co-moderators. And if you've seen a previous X's Intersection panel, you'll know that the exchange that happens, especially between the artists, is the hallmark of these talks. There will be time at the end for questions, of course, and we welcome you to join us for a conversation sure to be marked by curiosity and conviviality. And with that, I'll welcome Cesáreo to introduce our first panelist.
Thank you. So the first panelist up is Santa Barraza. Where is she? Right there. Please join us. Born and raised in Kingsville, Texas, she's a contemporary Chicana Tejana artist and founder of Barraza Fine Art LLC, a gallery and studio situated in her hometown. Her artwork is a reflection and appropriation of ideology and imagery of ancient Mexico, recontextualized with the contemporary experience of the indigenous mestizo, mestiza, and Mexican-American Chicana, Chicanos of North America. Her vida reflects a career replete with awards, appearances in lectures, exhibitions, and publications. Please help me welcome Santa Barraza.
I want to thank everybody for being here, and I want to thank also our artist friends that are here, but also the Latinx organization that has been so generous with all of us. We had a wonderful evening last night with a lot of food and partnerships with everybody else, and of course, Mr. Moreno. I thank you for having us here today. I want to talk about some of my work, and I want to say that my artwork. Can we have the first slide? Or okay, thank you. I want to say that my artwork is about reclamation of heritage, culture, and memory. It is a form of decolonization of South Texas, an experience of Nepantla, which of course is a collision of two opposing cultures where a third emerges. And so this is the point where I explain my artwork. But what I want to say is that this particular painting is called Las Mujeres de Nepantla. This was produced when I participated in a residency with Gloria Saldúa in 1995 in Saratoga, California. There were two writers, Gloria Saldúa and a writer from Chiapas. There was Liliana Wilson from Austin, Texas, myself, and also an artist from Mexico City whose last name was Guerra. So we lived together for about 6 weeks producing this whole concept of Nepantla. So this is one of the paintings that I produced, and you can see in the middle, there is a Llorona with two heads because she was both positive and negative, evil and good. And you can see the fetus of her stomach, in her stomach. You can also see the Malinche emerging in the background, and my grandmother. My grandmother is with the pink dress that she wears. I use her a lot in my artwork to sort of commemorate and empower women of South Texas. And you can see in the background, Coyochalki, the moon goddess. And of course, Gloria Saldúa believed that this millennium was the millennium of the women, and the women were going to take back the power they had lost. So this was an important painting. We produced artwork and also writings, and then we had an exhibit in San Jose, California at that time. You can see also in the body of water, the body parts of Coyochalki, the dismembered Coyochalki, the moon goddess, and also you can see the symbol of the crocodile. I use the codices, the Mesoamerican codices in most of my work. Can we go to the next one? I use the image again. I have a photograph of my grandparents when they were dating in the early 1950s, around that time. So I use it again and again in a lot of my artwork. This particular image is actually painted on amate paper. And amate paper was a sacred paper of the Aztecs. The Aztecs actually had the people from Puebla at that time to pay tribute to them, and they paid tons and tons of this paper because it was considered sacred paper. So they used it and they cut images of their deities, and they would light a fire and they would burn it and offer it to the gods. And so I felt that it was sacred paper, so that I should use it as a form of process and also divine, because they felt it was divine paper. So in this particular image, of course, I use the codices. You see the boxes below it, and I use images of that are affiliated from the codices of womanhood and also the sense of home. So you can see on the far right, well, it would be my right, you can see an image from the codices of a flower, then the symbol of a water, symbol of Olin, constant movement, energy, and transformation. You see an image of, I believe that that's a rabbit, and rabbit is a symbol of Coyochalki, the moon goddess. Then you see a temple, which is a symbol of a home. And the next one is also, again, another interpretation of the rabbit, and then another symbol of water. And you can see in the background, I appropriated the image of Clemente Orozco from the paintings in Hospicio Cabañas, where he has the whole story of the Spaniards conquering Mexico, the conquest of Mexico. And in that particular painting, I appropriated when he painted Cortés with a metal armor, just destroying all of the indigenous through his pathway. And so what I did is you can see on his chest, he has the running W, which was actually the symbol of the King Ranch, which is where I'm from. I was born and raised in Kingsville, Texas. And you can see that the running W, actually the face of the warrior is not Cortés. This was supposed to be Cortés, but it's Richard King. And then you see the temple. So this is the painting. Oh, and you can see sort of like I don't have a pointer, but you can see sort of like the red, yellow oxide color. That is the symbol of the earth, and the one above it is the symbol of the sky. So this is all images from the codices of ancient Mexico. Can we go to the next one? This is actually my brother Eloy. He passed away in 2022, so I did this piece of artwork for his wife, Yvonne. You can see in the background, I actually did this drawing a long time ago. I did it in the 1970s when he would come and visit me in Austin, Texas, where I studied art. And so what I did is appropriated that image, and then I manipulated it. You can see gold leafing. You can see my brother Eloy standing with a lot of calligraphy, very decorative. And then in the sky, you see him with what I do with a lot of my pieces, I actually did a series of retablos. And what I do also, I take the milagros or the amulets in metal, and I appropriate it and attach them to the artwork. And you can see a heart right below my brother, and he's up in the sky. And you can see sort of like the image of the rays of the Virgen de Guadalupe behind him. This particular image is done with gold leafing and crayons and Prismacolor and watercolor and acrylics. And you can see, and it's work on paper, where some of the others were work on metal, work on amate paper, but this is just rag paper. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Next, it's a pleasure to welcome Marcus Chormicle, who is a lens-based artist and independent curator from Las Cruces, New Mexico, and a lineal descendant of the Agua Caliente band of Cahuilla Indians. Through photography, he explores ideas around family, memory, and the intersection of class, race, and history in the Southwest. Welcome, Marcus.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for having me here today. It's really a really special time to be here in Pilsen with you all. Thinking about this idea of lines of descent, I wanted to begin with this photograph. I primarily work in photography, and then that has evolved into some approaches outside of direct photography that I'll speak on a little bit more. But this photograph was taken of my uncle Bobby when he was released from prison in 2020. And so this was taken at his home in Doñana, New Mexico, which is just, right outside of Las Cruces. And he had just came home, and my auntie and I, his sister, we were taking um, groceries to him because he wasn't able to leave his house just yet. And he was burning away all the leaves and weeds and the things that had fallen in his yard over the years that he had been away. And so he was preparing his home to return to and to be in again. And so it was this photograph of him burning away all this debris of the life that had passed while he had been incarcerated. For those that don't know, New Mexico has the highest rate of incarceration for any place with a democratic government in the world. It's like 6 in 100,000 people. And so he had survived the system, and he's been out of prison ever since, which is really great. And so I took this photograph of him, and it was shared and on social media. And then in 2024, when Aaron Bushnell, the serviceman that self-immolated, protesting the genocide in Palestine, after he had made that protest, this photograph began to be censored on Instagram. And so there was a disclaimer, and you had to consent to see it, basically. And around that same time, I was starting to I'd becoming really interested in Luis Jimenez's Man on Fire, his sculpture of Cuauhtemoc, in a state of emulation. And for those that don't know, Cuauhtemoc was executed by Cortez and was burnt alive. And so Jimenez renders him in this state of defiance, the stance of defiance. And so this photograph, which was about one specific thing in my life and my uncle's life, this one experience, came to connect to this generational story of indigenous resistance and resistance of imperialism across the continent, relating to imperialism, European imperialism and American imperialism across the world. And so it just became recontextualized in my mind, and I wanted to start with this photograph as thinking about this place of descent, because it started off of this relationship directly to one of my elders, and became about so much more as time has gone on. This is an installation of photographs on the Agua Caliente Indian Reservation that I made with a different uncle. This comes from a project of photographs called Say Uncle, where I've been going out with my uncle, my grandfather's brother, into the reservation onto these historic migration trails up into the mountains. So here you can see one of the lower peaks of the San Jacinto Mountains there outside of Palm Springs, California. For those that don't know, Palm Springs, California is built within the boundaries of the Agua Caliente Indian Reservation. And so we were going out to these places where our ancestors had traveled since time immemorial, up into the mountains during the hot months of the year. Palm Springs gets hot like Phoenix, so 120 plus degrees. And so our ancestors would travel up into the mountains every summer. And so me and my uncle had been making these photographs there on the reservation. And in 2025, we built this installation in response to the Desert X Biennial, which is a sculpture biennial that takes place in the Coachella Valley that brings international artists to the valley to build sculptures. And it's a large draw for tourism and art in the valley. And I was engaging with this idea of passing through the boundaries of Indian land. And so this is built on top of my uncle's allotment. So the piece of the reservation that was divided up to him when he was born. It's a small piece of undeveloped land near downtown Palm Springs. And for those that come to the Coachella Valley for Desert X, if they're flying anywhere from what we call the North or South American continent, Abayala, they're flying from Indian land to Indian land, landing on an international airport inside a reservation. And the reservation there is a checkerboard reservation. So every other square mile is on and off of Indian land, on and off of Indian land. And then they would enter from the street onto his allotment and then enter into the piece itself. So we were thinking about the kind of arbitrary nature of what is and isn't regarded as Indian land. It's all paperwork and documents and money. So this idea of creating these kind of like porous entry points into it and then engaging with the ways in which that land is seen. So they're mostly photographs of my uncle and landscapes there within the reservation up in the canyons. And also the structure of it forms a spiral. And so thinking about this unbroken chain of walking in these places that has taken place within my family and my lineage since people have been there. We've been walking in these same places. So to stand in that place is something that's unbroken, that hasn't been taken away from anyone in my generational chain up to this point. Here's a few details of what those look like there. And finally, I want to come to some newer work that's about my body in relationship to the lineage of my family. And so I'm making these performance photographs where I assume theoretical positions that both of my grandfathers may have found themselves in. My maternal grandfather, who was a white man in New Mexico, was drafted into the Vietnam War, and when he returned from being compelled to participate in American imperialism in Vietnam, he was a part of what was called the Chaparral Gunfighters, which was an acting troupe of actors that would go around and perform these Wild West gunfighter shows, primarily in southern New Mexico. And he would do these crazy flips off of these sets, these Wild West sets that they would build, and they'd perform like Billy the Kid breaking out of jail in Lincoln, New Mexico, and all these Wild West shows. And he came back from fighting in this war, and I project a type of catharsis onto that practice, and certainly out of my own experience from art, this performance of your own death again and again and again. My maternal grandfather on my Agua Caliente side, he was killed by police in Las Cruces. He was shot while in jail and died of the wound. He was handcuffed in the jail, and so I'm engaging with these two different lineages in the ways in which people in New Mexico, different kinds of people, have had to deal with that legacy of gun violence in New Mexico, and re-performing these deaths again and again through photography and performance, and imagining the postures that both of my grandfathers may have assumed at different points for very different reasons. And on top of that, thinking about the ways in which, as artists, we're a part of the system, especially in New Mexico, where we have relatively little industry, and a large part of our economy is reliant on tourism and on art. And my place within that as a artist from New Mexico, and how we are kind of forced to perform out these histories again and again, and engage with those things in those ways. And that wraps it up for me. Thank you.
And now the third artist to present today is Shizu Saldamando. Shizu is a Los Angeles-based mixed media artist originally from San Francisco's Mission District. Primarily concerned with portraiture and drawing, she experiments with a broad range of surfaces and materials. Saldamando's practice employs tattooing, video, painting and drawing on canvas, wood, paper, and cloth, and functions as a celebration and homage to peers and to loved ones. Please help me welcome Shizu Saldamando.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. My mother was born in Chicago in the South Side after the Japanese American internment camps. they couldn't go back to the West Coast, so they made their way to the South Side of Chicago and had a greasy spoon. And she lived in the basement of this house, this building, for about 13 years before they moved back. So it's nice to be back home and to have some ancestral roots here, and to acknowledge that. Thank you. So I wanted to start with this piece that I did in 2020, that was exhibited in 2021, as a young artist just coming out of art school in 2020, no, 2005 is when I graduated art school. The only sort of exhibition opportunities available at the time, especially if you're doing work with like any overt cultural references, seemed to be Day of the Dead open call shows, exhibitions. So I did a lot of those right after I graduated from Cal Arts. And I did these pieces in reference to Japanese American prison camps during World War II. And so during the pandemic, Sandy Rodriguez, another artist who works with Mate Paper, was curating a show at Self Help Graphics, a place I had worked at as an archivist and a office worker when I first graduated UCLA in 2000. And so she asked if I wanted to be a part of this Day of the Dead show. And this was in 2020, and it was for the next year. And I was reluctant because I was like, oh, I'm over those Day of the Dead shows. I don't think I want to do that anymore. And I was stuck at home with my toddler, taking care of them 24/7 during lockdown. My partner, my husband, is a essential worker, being an automotive technician. So I was alone all day with my child and did not have the mental capacity to do the technical painting and drawing, which I normally do. So I decided to revisit this project, the paper flower project, that I first started for the Day of the Dead shows back when I graduated art school. And they were referencing the paper flowers that the Japanese Americans made in the prison camps, because real flowers were not available when someone passed on. So they would get together as a community and create these paper flowers together and create floral wreaths, bouquets to honor the dead, and to have some sort of communal rapport and connection and communal mourning with other people in the camps who are going through a similar experience. And so I revisited that project and decided to use the chain link fence, because during that time I was seeing images of all the detention centers, the children being separated from families, and wanting to acknowledge that part of my history, being Mexican American, Chicana, also just trying to be cathartic and be transformative with art, with the traumas that we were all kind of facing collectively, and honoring and acknowledging the traumas and the detention and the way history not only repeats itself, but kind of never really stopped traumatizing communities based on their ethnicities and identities. So this piece was born out of that, and also seeing the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests for the murder of George Floyd, and seeing communities coming together with these parallel struggles and connective, not even parallel, but at the same struggles about incarceration and talking about abolition, and how much community care and things that were shifting. And I would even argue that the art world was being called to task during that time too. And you had a general shift of mainstream institutions and blue chip galleries being called to task, especially in LA, having these big rosters of artists and never having any Mexican American artists on these rosters, and being in Los Angeles. And really thinking about that, and shifting the narrative and shifting who was being put on, and how much our community struggles are interlinked. So this piece was kind of, when this is all over, as a tongue-in-cheek kind of reference to, this is always enduring, and we all endure collectively, constantly, but also to think about when things open up again, and when can we see our friends again, and when can I get out of my house with my toddler and go visit friends. So I used a paper flower pattern from the archives of the Japanese American National Museum to create the same flowers, and they were referenced from a Sears Roebuck's catalog. And so I used that. So you would think that they would be from like an origami, like historically traditional Japanese reference, but actually they used Sears Roebuck's catalog to order everything. It's like the Amazon of the time in the 40s. And I made this piece in reference to the detention centers, but also instead of using a funeral wreath, I used the huicholes kind of like God's eye pattern to reference more of an indigenous Mexican reference as well. Yeah, and that's what I put in the Day of the Dead show, like 20 years after graduating art school and revisiting it and being very proud of it to be a part of that exhibition. At Self Help Graphics, what? Okay. Um, so this piece too, this was I was asked to be in a show at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, and it was called Ordinary People. And it's a work about, I guess, figurative work or work based in sort of this idea of photorealism, curated by Anna Katz. And it was actually a show that was not culturally based. There was actually white people in the exhibition as well, which was like really rare from my exhibition history. So I was like, I jumped at the chance to be in the show too. And Anna really liked these drawings on bed sheets I had done back again just out of graduate school. And I had done these pieces. The big influence for me in high school was Teen Angel magazine and Baño art. During the 90s, there was a lot of prison art in being influenced by people in the Mission District. So I had cousins or like friends that would come to school with baño art in their binders that their tío or cousin had sent them from San Quentin. There was a lot of gang activity. So this was a thing that me and my friends would try to copy the technique of the ballpoint pen on cloth. So when I got to CalArts, I had this crazy. I kept having this crazy critique of my work as somehow being problematic because I was depicting brown bodies as my subject matter and to a predominantly white audience at CalArts, which were my classmates, because back then it wasn't as diverse. I think it was very not diverse at all. There was a lot of people from the Midwest though, so I learned a lot about how people from the Midwest viewed my work, and so for this I decided to do. I would go to different Chicano art shows and ask people to look at me like they were looking at a piece of art, and I would take their photo and do their portrait on linen or stretched canvas and displayed it for my thesis show. And it's called Looking at Art, and it was about um, the idea that brown people could actually be in a portrait and actually look and be purveyors of culture and attend art shows as well, which is something that I don't think CalArts really realized was possible or something. So I did that work, and I was really hating the response, the dialogue surrounding it, because I was being reactionary, and it was institutional critique, and I was so over institutional critique, and I just didn't want to do art about art. So I was going to clubs a lot, dancing, and I decided to do portraits of my friends embracing and making out on bed sheets instead. So instead of the high art canvas reference, I used bed sheets. So when Anna Katz asked me to revisit that project, I jumped at it. I was like, of course, I'll do that. And I asked my friends if they would pose for me again. And of course, they were down because they're, the goats, they're amazing. So I had my friend Sancha and Prisk perform. La Sancha is an amazing opera singer. Performer. She, if you've seen her work, I highly recommend to go see one of her performances. Prisk is an amazing cook, artist as well. They make belts, leather work. My friend Carm and Kat, and that's their cat Olive. So actually, it's Carm, Kat, and Olive, and Kat is short for Catherine. So it's Carmen and her partner Catherine and their cat Olive. Carm is one of my oldest friends from Downey, who is a graphic designer who works for Niagara Water. So if you go to the Niagara Water website, that's her work. And then also Guadalupe Rosales and her partner Ashley. And Lupe Rosales, of course, is in the Venice Biennial, an amazing sculptor and archivist who started Veteranas y Rucas. Yes, yeah. So I'm indebted to them for always trusting me with their image. Thank you. And this piece is the installation, the Embrace series. And so it's me figuring out how to enjoy drawing and art, and again, besides when I tried to connect out all of the violence of the institution that I was dealing with. And so it was great to revisit it in a way, in a time when I'm really enjoying making art and creating it again. So this is the last slide. This is the portrait of Luis Jacinto and their partner, Kenny Rosas. And they live in like a really nice part of LA, Crescent Heights. And Luis Jacinto is an amazing photographer, artist. They have a show up now at Office Space at the Bendix building in downtown LA. You should go check it out if you're in LA. And Luis is one of the, an old photographer, from the generation where he documented OSCO and the punk scene in LA back in the 70s. And so I was at their house and they posed for me, and Luis's photos and work was in the background. And so there's his photos from the OSCO and also of Alice Bag and Nervous Gender. And so there's these different histories that I thought it would be great to honor within the painting. And because I usually don't do a lot of backgrounds, but for this, I thought it was really important to honor his practice. And his eyes were closed in one of the photos, and I thought it was very appropriate because Luis is very stoic and like a Buddha figure, very very sardonic and witty, but also very quiet. So it was great. And then also Kenny's in fashion, so they were dressed to the nines because they knew I was coming over to take their photo. And this was in their living room, but the full hat with the feather and everything that they personalized. And so I was really honored that they let me do their photo. And I think, and this is historically, like normally what I do is portraits of friends and family. And so it was great that this is full circle to be here. So that's it. Thank you so much.
At this time, I'll invite our panelists and Cesáreo to join us in the chairs so we can continue the conversation together. Is this thing on? Yes. All right. Thank you all. Thank you. I'm sorry. Oh. What a little dramatic shift. I'm good. Oh, I'm good. I'm good. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you all so much for such thoughtful and nuanced glimpses into your practices. To start, I wanted to ask a question, thinking about lineages, thinking about lines of descent, and thinking about how family histories inform each of all of the work that you shared today. And I just wanted to start with a question about source material and how your work relates to either family photos or kind of the either previous works and how that coalesces for you in terms of how you think about your practice. And this is for everyone.
Oh, I just take my own photos as source material, and then the same way Santa works with different substrates, I try to work with more craft references now, like intentionally. So the wood grain, I'm really interested in having the wood grain show through. And the bed sheets, I go to Savers or something like a store to find vintage bed sheets, and so the source material becomes a reference to domestic, but also my own snapshots. Yeah, and like I was really great. It was nice to see all the mixed media in your work as well for that.
And to go next. Source material, I use old photos as you were seeing, but also influences of the Mesoamerican codices. And what I do is they use, like for example, in some of my paintings, I didn't show them here, but I have 12 pairs of squares with one dot for day one, and it goes up to 13. That was the sacred week of the Mesoamerican culture. And they had sacred codices that were folded accordion books, and they would have in the central panel everything. It was like a calendar, and you could tell what happened in that day because dot one had two boxes. So it was morning, nighttime, and then the day dot two was the second day, morning, and then nighttime. So everything that happened in that central panel was what happened in that week of that day of that morning. It was an incredible format. And when I was in graduate school, I was told that I wanted to do a master's in art history. And they asked me, well, what do you want to do it in? And I said, well, Chicano art. And they said, well, that doesn't exist. So when they told me that, I was like, oh, I have to validate myself. So that's when I started asking questions about my family. What is our history? And I found out these wonderful stories. So I use the stories in my family as source. I found out in the documents that we have that we're Karankawa Indians. And so we inhabited the Gulf Coast of Mexico along the Matagorda Bay. Our tribe encountered Cabeza de Vaca in the 1700s. And then they enslaved him, and he became the first ethnographer of the Americas. And because he knew how to heal, they let him go. So all these things. And then he had Estebanico with him, who was a Black conquistador. And the women loved him, and they ended up killing him. So all these stories were incredible stories. So I use those in my art. And then Don Pedro Jaramillo, the healer, all these stories that my aunts told me about how, and I have a lot of work on Don Pedro Jaramillo too. And he told the stories. They would tell me stories about how he was clairvoyant and how he would predict that there would be muebles del aire, furniture of the year. We're talking about the 1800s, and I think it was airplanes. And then he would say there's going to be fires in the horizon, lumbres on the horizon. And my aunt would say, well, there was a lot of explosion in the oil fields because there was a lot of oil fields. But I thought it was World War I and World War II. So all of those stories I use in my art. And so as far as sources, stories in the family, also history, Mesoamerican codices, because we're natives, So I wanted to use a format that was strictly an American format, not Western ideology. So even though we were taught to paint like the Renaissance artists, I wanted to use something different. So that's why I looked to the codices, because that's truly an American format of the American continent. So anyway, those are some of the sources that I used for my art.
For me, very similar stories within my family. And I started photography because I wanted to get out of Las Cruces, and I went to journalism school because I really wanted to get away. And then I realized almost immediately I didn't want to be a journalist and started making photographs with my family. And so that whole process was going on, and then I realized, oh, it's all because my grandmother and my mother both really liked photography, and they both took a lot of family photos. My grandmother's house burned down in the 60s in Palm Springs, and her and my grandfather moved to Las Cruces, where her family was from. And when he was killed, she just became this like really avid photographer of our family, and I have all of her photographs now. She passed in 22, and my family gave me the photographs, and I've been slowly scanning them and making work with them, um and it's so crazy how you go back into those and then you realize like, oh, this is just like this photograph that I took, sometimes with similar people even. And so it's crazy that there's just such a strong root in that. And my mother too, my mom, we would go up and down New Mexico and out to California a lot, and we would stop in cemeteries, and she would take photos. She would pull over and we'd take photos in the cemeteries, and she never did anything with the photos. She didn't consider herself an artist, and I don't even remember her ever looking at them, but like just that experience of being in a hot cemetery and watching my mom take photographs. Yeah, after all this idea of I want to be a journalist and I want to go do my own thing, and then you're like, oh, it's just what I saw those two women do my whole life pretty much. So yeah.
Thank you. Cesáreo?
Yeah, I'm actually more interested in hearing you all talk, but I'll throw a question out there. The thing that seems very interesting is how you each mention a way in which you find your own education experience because the system or because of what's presented in wherever you're at, whatever school you're at, just doesn't fulfill you or doesn't give you what you want. So I'm just wondering, for younger creative students of art today, is there anything that you would say to them that might inspire them or warn them or guide them in any way, knowing what you know now?
Well, I would say listen to your elders and be inquisitive, ask questions, ask about the family, because I didn't even know my mother had gone to college. I didn't even know my mother had been at Texas A&I, it was called at that time, in Kingsville, Texas, in the 1940s, until we went, she took me when I graduated from high school to the university to sign up for the college, and at that time, we were economically deprived. So she said, well, you need to go to the finance office. You need to find, get some assistance, financial assistance. So when I went to the finance office, his name was Mr. Salinas. He gets up and he hugs my mom. And I thought, what's going on? Well, that was her classmate in college, but I didn't even know. And so I didn't know until that time that she was in college. So I think those stories are very important.
I agree. I think the listen to your elders thing in a different way. I don't know, the experience of getting to be here today, and we had the opportunity to go into the collection and the archives here, and it's so interesting that you feel there's a lot of moments where you can feel all alone in it, and then if you have the opportunity or the good fortune to get to engage with the wider art world, with the history of the art world, and especially within a cultural context, you realize it's all been done before, and there is a precedent. Even within my grandmother's own photographs, there's a precedent for the things that I'm doing, and that's really comforting. It's like, even if not everyone's immediately with you all the time, you have people that have worked really hard, and I'm in a good position where it's like there are Chicano studies programs in universities now. I'm currently in the MFA program at the University of Arizona. But that doesn't mean that you're necessarily always around like-minded people within those programs yet. And but to know that there's people that have kind of tread that path before, and to know that the work is out there, and having the good fortune of being told how to look for it, I think is part of it. And so looking to your elders or your ancestors within your medium or your practice, it is there, and they have been doing it for hundreds of years. There's been people pushing the envelope, and that's really a comforting thing to realize at some point, is that you're not actually treading new territory, even though it feels that way sometimes. You're walking these paths, like in the work with my uncle. It's like they've been there before, and you're standing where they stood.
Yeah, me and some friends started a separate reading group outside of school because we weren't learning what we wanted to really learn. So, and then we were being accused of creating fictions with our references, sort of, because no one heard of who we were being influenced by. So I think it's really important to establish connections with other students, or other people, not even in the institution, but outside of it, and read what you want to read and discuss amongst your friends. And I feel now that it's a real kind of we're slipping backwards in history, right? And things are being defunded, programs are being cut. So we definitely need to really create community, establish these, well, not, just double down in our communities, and really figure out how to sustain knowledge with each other. And that is what everybody is talking about. Yeah.
Can I say something? One of the things that I studied or that I learned from my family is when I was trying to validate myself, I went to do research with my great aunts. They're not with us any longer. And they told me these wonderful stories. They said, and I didn't know what it meant, but I found out what it meant, reverse migration. They said, during World War I, before World War I, we did a they didn't say reverse migration. They said we went to Mexico. They crossed the border, they went back to Mexico, and they stayed in Matamoros because my great-grandfather had only one son, and he didn't want him to fight a war that he didn't believe in. So there were these caravans of wagons with ganado and horses going back into Mexico, and they built a tent city in Mexico, and they stayed there until the war was over. Then they came back because they were from the United States. I mean, they were there since it was New Spain, then it became Mexico, then it became the United States. People were there. I mean, we were there. That was our ancestors, but we didn't know that. And they did this whole thing of reverse migration that Dr. Emilio Zamora talks about it in his new book of History of Texas. So anyway, so my great aunts told me all that story, and they were not educated, but they were there and they remember they were in the wagons, and it took them 30 days to get from Kingsville to across the border, the Rio Grande River. So these are wonderful stories.
That kind of reminds me when you were talking about the Sears catalog and a story that's kind of related to all this. And when during COVID, I was driving. I had been living in Phoenix, and I was moving back home to Las Cruces. I didn't know I was moving home, but it was like I'm gonna go for 2 weeks because school's out, and then I'm gonna come back. And I was talking on the phone with my uncle that lives still on the Agua Caliente, and um, he was telling me, because we're talking about the toilet paper shortage. And I was like, oh yeah, this is crazy, uncle. Like the toilet paper is running out. And he's like, well, nephew, my grandparents used to wipe their ass with the Sears catalog. So if they made it through that, like I think we'll figure out how to wipe. And it's like, I don't know, in like the face of a global pandemic, and there's there's built up resilience. It does accumulate, it does build up. And I think sometimes it's really scary to hear stories like that and be like, dang, I don't know that I could do that, go back and forth and back and forth. But if they could do it and we got to this point, then I think that like, okay, with how much easier it is that I don't have to worry about tearing up the Sears catalog, like I have like the energy that is left to give, I think, you know.
And I know that you all may have some questions for each other, so I'd love to just open it up to our panelists to be, um,
Would you like to start?
I wanted to ask Sichu about, and we sort of talked about it last night, about did you utilize any of the actual techniques or materials from that cellmaids use to create their pañuelos, their handkerchiefs? And so can you talk about that?
Right, yeah. Um, I would buy like the handkerchiefs from like Sears again, the plug for Sears. Uh, or order them now. I think I did a series of handkerchiefs with self-help graphics for their past like a Day of the Dead show in 2016, and they had to order it online. But as far as like the technique in terms of like the milk washing or the way that they would prep the baños, no, I have not done that. I just use a regular ballpoint pen. Um, but yeah, it's fascinating to learn about that too, because I worked in a tattoo shop for a while, and they would talk about how they would use like ashes for like prison tattoos, or they would grind up chess pieces too. So just thinking about the creativity out of resiliency or scarcity, right? Like what we can create outside of abundance. Yeah, it's really fascinating. So, yeah. And then the bed sheets now, I guess, is like what, um, and yeah, it's interesting to go to like treasure hunting for the bed sheets that have florals, and then finding blood stains on them and thinking, oh yeah, maybe I should have looked closer, but then realizing that that's part of the history of used textiles. So, yeah.
So can I ask you a question? Okay, I had a question for you. I was going to ask you, when producing the photo of your relative with fire, did you investigate the element of fire historically or contemporary, the pyro artist performance?
Um, well, with a lot of my photographs, it's very responsive. So I'm there with my family, and then just kind of whatever's happening, I'm taking photographs of. And so a lot of the contextualizing of them happens after the fact. And so um, that photograph comes from a larger body of work called Still Playing with Fire. And so the work is about this way in which um, the work itself in a broad sense is about connecting the history of colonization and violence in New Mexico to ways that manifests in the everyday lives of Nueva Mexicanos and indigenous people and people with heritage there in that place. And so and how that still kind of comes up. And so to me, the fire becomes this opportunity for revival, for this new for a break in the cycle and an opportunity for that. So and then it became contextualized in some of the historical political relationship to fire in the recent, and that was outside of my control, not just seeing what's happening on the internet with it. So I am looking at it, but in the moment of making the photographs, at least for that photo that you're talking about, it was just responsive. And then now with the performance photographs that I showed at the end, those are also made in reference to family photos. Photographs of my grandfather and his acting troupe members performing in these Wild West gunfighter shows. I was given an album of those photographs at his funeral, and have used them as reference and also worked with those images as well into the work. So I am increasingly starting to like pre-visualize or make work contextualized with historical notions in the act of creation of the photograph, but previously it was all just responsive to what was happening.
My question.
Great. I have a question for both of you. Something that I think is really dear to me and that I see in both of your works is that this kind of assertion of your family and your friends and your community into the work and into these art spaces. And how has that experience been for you all, painting your grandparents or your family or your friends and your family and the people around you? Because to me, that's been part of the mission, I think, of my work is to insist on the inherent value of my family and their stories in this kind of canon that has just been about erasing and rolling over them so many times. And so I would just love to hear a little bit about your experiences in showing that type of work.
Yeah, my whole thing is like undermining hierarchies in whatever context. And so in the art context, I kind of view it as just trying to honor people that I really vibe with or admire. And they're not necessarily like great people, I guess, like, or good people even. Like some of them are like really sketchy, but like they're friends or, we vibe. And to be able to have that generosity to be able to depict them from that. So I'm really thankful and just really grateful that people trust me enough to let me to depict them. And selfishly, I think about it in a very indexical way, like it's very autobiographical in a way, because it's like my life, but then I don't have to show myself. I'm not like Frida Kahlo painting myself. I'm painting everybody else that I come across, and to give like a sort of a landscape of community and friends that exist outside of mainstream narratives of the victim or the activist or people that are constantly struggling because of this, but making it in my own point of view. And so that's where I guess the inspiration comes out of, is like we're a relatable, banal scene of a person, right? But it's not necessarily. I guess to put it in context, somebody asked me like, why don't you do more traditional imagery of like people in kimonos or ropa típica or some like huipiles or something? And I'm like, well, that's totally fine that everybody is inspired and does their own thing. But for me, I'm more inspired by like somebody with like a bunch of patches from like a punk show or something, because that's more something that I think is my own experience and community. So yeah, I'm just adding to the landscape of figurative portraiture. Yeah.
I think that I started using my artistic career. I started using women a lot in women, and I have practically all of my work is on women. And I think the reason was to empower women, because we were sort of like downcast in society. And I think you asked that question last night about our role, how did I relate to the Chicanos and the Chicano movement? And it was very difficult. And that was one of the reasons why I formed with another co-writer, another co-artist, Nora Gonzalez Dotson. We formed a group called Mujeres Artistas del Suroeste, Women Artists of the Southwest in 1975. And we were active for 10 years. And the reason for that is because I was a part of Los Quemados, which was an art group that Carmen Lomas Garza was in, Amado Peña, Cesar Martinez. There were 8 of us, but mostly they were men. And when other women would try to get into that organization, they would review their work and they would say, you're not good enough, and they would not let them in. So we decided we're going to do our own group. So we formed MAS. And so then we became incorporated, and then we did all these projects. And one of the leading projects, or the most important ones, was Conferencia Plástica Chicana in 1979, where we brought artists from Mexico to Austin, because we were in Austin. We went to the University of Texas in Austin. So we brought all these artists, Raquel Tibol, scholars. We brought a photography show of the Manuel Alvarez Bravo. We brought all these artists, and actually Jose Rodriguez from here, founder of this museum, came from Chicago to Austin for that conference. So it was an incredible conference, and we did it because there was a need. But I also refer to the photographs of my female ancestors. Like there's one of Canuta Garza, which is my great-grandmother, and she's very strong. She was one of the colonizers of South Texas. And so I painted myself, or drew myself as her, with a skull in her hand, because she was a victim of Richard King that I mentioned. He was a cattle baron of South Texas, and he did not acquire his land, as they say, for 1 penny an acre. He used violence to acquire it. And so I use him and my ancestors as a story, but I make it more in the present sense. So.
Thank you. I wanted to pose a question to all 3 of you. Something that's emerged as we've been having this conversation, there's kind of a recurring theme of embodiment, of posing, of holding the body in ways and gestures that your ancestors held, Santa, as you just mentioned, or like people in the past, right, that have informed your history. And I'm just curious to hear kind of how you all think about that aspect of embodiment. How, Marcus, in your presentation, you talked about in the Man Down series that had a cathartic aspect to it for you. So I think there's also something interesting, right? When we think about family histories, there are those moments when people say, oh, you do that, the exact same way that your aunt or your mother or your dad does. And so and likewise, Shizu, you were talking about posing as well, in the Embrace series, and and also in your work as a grad student, where you were asking people to pose for you as if they were looking at art. So I don't know, this is just an invitation, as I drop something, to invite you all to just talk about the embodied aspect of not only making the work, but being in the work, or inviting people to be in the work. Go first.
Sure. Yeah, I that work, as well as the other projects that I've done, I found that type of catharsis throughout them. And for me, the work was, well, really all my artwork kind of began during the time I was in journalism school, and I was struggling with this expectation of dropping into other people's communities and coming back with some sort of objective statement about what was happening, whatever it was. And so I wanted to look inwards, in a sense. And so I started going back home to Las Cruces and making photographs there of my family. And it worked in a way to feel closer to them, because I was at a time where I felt distant. I wanted to make distance for so long. I wanted to separate myself from dysfunction, and I wanted my own life outside of those cycles. And to me, all of it became this way of moving closer and creating a safe distance, in a way, an embrace-ful that, I mean, I really identify with this idea of it being an assertion of the value of them, and and my story too within that. And it's like, if they can matter, I can matter, and anyone can matter, And so this ability to look close and to understand, and so this idea of embodiment, I mean, I've come to understand my relationship to people within my family and our ancestors as being more embodied. It's not just like I'm similar. It's like I am you. I'm this continuation of you, and I carry it all with me, and I have to find out how to do that. And so by assuming the position, so to speak, and embodying those things, I feel like I'm trying to learn how to work through those things and how to hold it and how to carry it. And that has been the real change from the work. That's like for whatever art can be outside of yourself. Like for me, that's been what it has achieved already is through working through those things. And I think that's why I'm pushing more towards this like direct embodiment and a one for one or trying to see myself in those shoes in a way is because I'm looking for that opportunity to be closer and to understand so that I can navigate through it all.
I mean, similarly, like I know when I'm painting somebody, there's this really meditative process where I'm like thinking about them constantly. And I should text them, like, what are they doing this weekend? Or, and trying to reach out or establish some dialogue. And so it is that like I see myself in them, but also like I'm just like meditating on them too. In this really weird, like, not in a stalkery way, but like in an honorific kind of like, I don't want to, I want to put care into this creation of this image, and give it the respect it deserves too, and spend time with it. And yeah, just because if I can do that to show the time I used to create that image, that they would somehow, see the value of their image as well in that, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I produce several pieces where I would draw myself or paint myself as one of my ancestors, like Yokomo Kanuta. She was a very powerful person, or very strong, like she fought Richard King, her family. So she was a survivor. So I really admired that personality. So I painted myself with her next to me, or as myself as from an old photograph, and I'm carrying the skull in my hand. I also did one of Yoi Mama, my mother, as a young girl, and myself next to her in pencil drawings, because my mother, they suffered a lot, and yet, they survived. They were survivors. So I admired that quality. They were like these colonial women that went against all odds. Like even South Texas, it was called No Man's Land. It was called Mustang Place, and nobody went there. Women didn't go there, only men. And so these women were survivors in the colonial area. So I admired that quality. So I try to embed that in the photographs I appropriated. And I also became very interested in legends like La Llorona, and I embedded things in the legends that I saw in my family, like my aunt Esther died from childbirth, and there's a story that they believe, the Mesoamericans believe, that you died in childbirth, that then your spirit would become a warrior spirit. They had 13 levels to the heaven, and will go up to the same level as the male warriors that died in a battlefield, because they were battling between life and death when they were giving birth. So they died in birth. Their spirit would become a female warrior spirit, and they were called Cihuateteos, which is derived from La Llorona, or the Llorona derived from that. And so I admired that, and I started doing drawings of people that had died in childbirth. So yeah.
I have, I'm not sure exactly how the question is going to come out, but in seeing the work that some of the work that you've shown, when you look back at your past, when you look back at your ancestors, or you look back at your lineage, when you look back, oftentimes it seems that you find non-Western spirituality. I'm just curious, does it find you, or do you find it, or do you look for it, or because it's clearly not necessarily Christian Catholic, right? But it's non-Western, and somehow it speaks to you, and it speaks through your work. So if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Can I say something? In my thesis, I actually worked with shamanism because I was told I wanted to do, I started doing fiberglass murals, three-dimensional, because I was influenced by Luis Jimenez. And I was told I couldn't do that because murals was not really art. That's what they told me. So, and I thought to myself, okay, the Vatican is not real art, you know, but I didn't want to argue with them because they were the ones that would score me and I would not graduate. So I shifted gears. And so that's when I started looking at my family and this whole notion of curanderismo. So I studied it and I realized that it derived from Siberia. And that's where when a man or a woman would become a shaman, which is a religion of the hunting tribes, that they would have these dreams. And then I realized that the Huicholes lived by dreams also. And they would have these dreams, and in their dreams, they would dream that that they were actually mutilated by these demons or these spirits, and their bodies would be torn apart and put in a pile. And then they would resurrect themselves from that pile and become this healer. And that was the belief that they had in Siberia. And so they had to do these costumes that they would wear. And these costumes, they had to attach these metal charms. For example, if a demon would cut your head off, you would have a head of the in metal, and you attach it to your. The costume was made out of stag, and you would attach it, and then you would attach like a hand that was cut off by another demon, and you would put it on your costume. And when you wore that costume, you had all these charms made out of metal that they would clank. And when it would clank, it would summon the spirits to come back, the demons, and help you when you were curing someone that had headaches, or someone had a problem with their hand, or someone had a problem with a leg. And so that derived, and we still have that in our culture. We have these milagritos that we put on the santos for miracles. And so it derived from ancient Siberia. So I was very enchanted with that, and I started using that in my thesis. And then I would have these dreams, and I started doing artwork based on these dreams. And later on, years later, I was involved in a show from the Los Angeles County Art Museum on Aztlán, a mythic homeland. And I saw the show. It traveled to Austin. I took my students there, and we saw the show. And in my dream, I actually did drawings of these ducks that I had in my dream with an eye on the side. And I saw that image in the Mesoamerican art of that exhibit, and they said shamanistic, but they didn't know what it was about, but I had dreamed it. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that you know, as I mean, through artwork, I've had a lot of good reason to study and learn more and read more and talk to my family more. And so you learn all of this about yourself and your culture and your ancestry, your family stories. And I think that's like a perfect, that's exact, like, it's not that you look for it or it looks for, or maybe you do kind of look for it, but it's not that it's far off. It's like, there's so many serendipitous coincidence, like they can't be coincidences. And so there's the, yeah, I think that especially, you know, if you're in a geographical place, like a physical place where you have roots, if you're fortunate enough to be in a place like that, for me, there's so much that you have to that just like all these things came from the land and from our relationship to each other in that land. And so if you're in that same place, you'll realize like, wow, there's a reason that they came to these conclusions. There's a reason that these practices developed, and it makes sense in relationship to the way that it all should be, you know. And so I think that when you're open to it, it all comes to you really fast. And those experiences like that there's been times where when, like, I don't know, dreams or things that you've made or things that you've seen, and then you find it somewhere in the pattern of your family history, in the pattern of your cultural legacy. And there's a reason that those pop up again and again. So I think it's like an opening up to it rather than a looking for it or it looking for you. It's just whenever it's always been there.
That's like, I think across the board, when I talk to other artists, there's always this sort of like acknowledgement of a connection to higher spiritual realms. As artists and creatives, you become dialed into that. Like it's like this. Everybody has it, but as art, I mean, even Takeshi Murakami talks about it in terms of his like seemingly like banal like anime things are actually they're depictions of demons, and how as an artist he's had to reconcile the idea of an artist being necromancer or something like that. Like, but I think that's a really bad English translation because there's not really a word for that. So yeah, and ancestral knowledge, like it's just by talking to family members, right? And there's so much of Catholicism that is rooted in indigenous knowledge that they've subverted, but then it's still alive in people that know the actual roots besides what the church has claimed, right? So yeah.
Fantastic. I think we have a little time for questions from the audience. Yeah, I think. Oh, and we've got a mic. And it looks like Diana Solis has a question.
It's more like hello and welcome, and love all of you and your work. I think more than a question is like, I'm just fascinated and also honored. For me to hear you, all of you, and to see your work. And I've seen your work except for, I forgot your name, young man.
Marcus.
Marcus. I think that the question that Cesáreo posed is, it goes back to indigeneity. I think that it is a non-Western, non-linear way of being in most of our families. And we find it, many of us find it. And sometimes it finds us, and then we begin to see the connections between that has happened in terms of our humanity and indigenous lives and ourselves today in the context of who we are today. And so I really believe that this happens to a lot of us as artists because, first of all, most of us, not all, here as Black and brown artists, we have a whole nother view of seeing things other than the Western view. And by the way, going to art school was torturous because the same thing happened to me. Drawings and creating queer art in a time when it wasn't even acceptable. I literally got thrown out of UIC from my professors for doing that kind of work. And we had to fight to just be who we are and to do the work that we thought was important for us because we didn't see anything like us there. We had to create it, right? Anyway, it's more of a comment than a question, but thank you for being here.
Thank you, Diana.
Thanks for this. This is great. Yeah, seems like this cohort, in the larger cohort is just really tremendous, bringing people together, all these great ideas, important issues. I feel privileged to be here. Santa was actually one of my professors back in the day at Penn State. So yeah, and we met up in Chicago after that too. I can't, there's like this, for me anyways, my father was a social worker and my mother was a teacher, an English teacher for a time. So this kind of the social, right, the social aspect is really, it's something that was really cultivated, since I was a kid. And there's this temptation to think about social activism, right? Like just listening to everything, it's kind of, it's kind of a sledgehammer. Maybe not, maybe it isn't, but I'm listening to these questions and embodiment. It kind of came up again, and how your work is impactful individually, to yourselves certainly, and also to people you're working with who, if you're collaborating with people to make the work, these various impacts. But I don't know if you want to say anything about your art as activism. There's just like so many levels. I have my thoughts about it, but I don't know. Did you want to share any more? How your work could function as activist, as artist, as activist. So, or the work, could phrase that differently, certainly.
Yeah. I really wonder about I think about it a lot, what the opportunity for art what is art's opportunity for change in the world, and I think it becomes really scary really fast to put any sort of expectations on the work. But it's apparent that art does improve people's lives. For me, I spoke a little bit about it, but my practice has brought me some stillness in my life and an ability to move more intentionally and to have a better relationship to my family and my world. And I think that that alone gives me some hope. Not that my work could do anything for anyone else or that my art is activism, but that my art insists on my ability to have a better relationship to the world. And um, and I think that good teachers and good people that put the tools of that into other people's hands is one step towards art's real potential within the world, potential for change, to create like an individual revolution within the self, so that the people might have the tools to survive. And so for me, I think that that's the only thing that I feel like art really certainly can do. And as far as like, if like not all art is activism, my art, I don't want it to be ever overinflated to be anything more than just like an opportunity for myself to exist better in the world. And I would hope that it could be something potentially more. There is room, but I think that just encouraging people to find their own center in it all. And it sounds like that's what you've done for people. And I think that yeah, I think that that's the only place that I really am sure there's some hope in it.
Yeah, like I think going through so many critiques and going through school, you kind of become just a little pessimistic about things too. Like we're preaching to the choir, we're creating work in this secular dialogue, but at what point do you take that knowledge and actually like go and, you know, maybe um, vandalize a defense contractor or factory? Or, you know, at what point do you actually take action? So yeah, I mean, everybody does their part. We all do our part. Us creating dialogue or us like decontextualizing, recontextualizing, making the personal, political, empowering through imagery. That's yeah, that can be seen as activist art. And we all kind of like do what we do that's true to ourselves and our own vision and our own hope for the world of reimagining better futures, right? And that's, I think, what we need to do, right? We need to reimagine, or a better world is possible, or what can we manifest? And then hopefully that will inspire younger people that have more energy to go out and do actual something. But anyways, this is just a hypothetical JK for all the phones and all the Palantirs listening right now.
I think that some of the things that I wanted to do is to empower women and give them a voice, because, you know, it was not, women didn't really have a voice in the 1970s, you know. So I tried to do that, and I did a lot of artwork based on women, like Emma Tenayuca, who was an activist in San Antonio in the 1930s. I did artwork based on Petra Vela Kennedy, who actually was a very, she was the wife of Mifflin Kennedy, the Kennedy Ranch, which is where my ancestors are from. They were vaqueros on the Kennedy Ranch, and actually my great-grandfather, Teofilo Barraza, was a surveyor, and he divided the estate between Mifflin Kennedy and Richard King, which are the cattle barons of South Texas. And so she financed, I don't know if you're aware of this, but she's sort of like, there is a book on her called Petra Vela Kennedy, The Legacy of Petra Vela. You should read it, sort of like the Roots for Mexican Americans. But what she did is she financed the campaign for Abraham Lincoln for president. She financed, we're talking about the 1800s, she financed the campaign for Porfirio Diaz to become president of Mexico. So she financed a railroad from South Texas to Mexico City. So she was a very powerful woman, but very little is known of her. So I actually did some artwork based on her. So I sort of gave women a voice that they didn't have before. And I feel that I opened up some doors, because I see a lot of young women come and say that inspired them and that they are now artists. because of what they have seen of my work. So that's good to know.
Thank you. I think we have time for one question.
Hello, thank you to the artists and the panel for sharing your stories. My name is Grace. And a lot of the theme, of course, today has been an internal journey and a journey historically, which is, I think, takes a lot of courage because you could find things that you maybe didn't want to find and interesting things that you didn't know you would find. My question for each of you then is, where do you find your art now going forward?
Yeah, I think I think about this a lot in terms of um, if I'm just being redundant a lot. Like I think about that like in a personal level, and then some crazy spiritual ancestral message comes to me, and I'm like painting something or gluing collage leaves, and the leaves from outside my studio fall like on top of them in the same way. And it's like, whoa, okay, maybe I should keep going. Like it's a sign that it's okay if it's just portraits and it's all right. Um, so I think that that's where I find my work now is trying to give a pep talk to myself, what I would give my artist friends, like just keep going, and it's okay if you just do what you have always done, and just make the work, just keep making things, and the evolution and it'll come naturally if you just keep doing that. But there is this kind of thing where I would wonder, oh, is it just really archaic to just do portraits on oil paint, or instead I should be doing um, some really grandiose installation and performance or something. And then you get something like AI now, right? Like, oh, well, maybe there is something really special about the hand, like the craft of a handmade thing now. And I shouldn't have gone into computer arts. It's okay, you know? So I'm finding just the practice and the parallels between my practice and my self-acceptance. And it's the notion of nonlinear evolution, right? And being okay with unfolding back into itself and having periods of non-productivity and being fine with that and not trying to adhere to this constant output that capitalism wants you to just create and push out a product, and learning and unlearning those things to be more at peace and sustain mental health. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I feel similar. I think that I've always really respected artists that are very iterative in their process, and they do the same thing again and again, year after year, and that commitment to a process, to something, it's incredible how much you find in that process, and I try to remind myself of that when I feel antsy about have I just been doing the same thing? Am I doing the same thing? Oh, I'm going home to Las Cruces again to make photographs, like, but I think for me, a big, not a big shift, this a shift over the last few years is coming to that realization of that my photographs are very much just a continuation of the other people, specifically my grandmother and my mother, that photographed in my family, and just maybe one little notch over from them. So we can see their photographs and my photographs as iterations of each other in that way. And so I think the change in my process is really rooting itself in those photographs and these ideas of how my family has made images of themselves for generations now. And I think that trying to just embrace that slow moving process of it, and that the commitment to that is the thing that's beautiful in it. And that's where I'm trying to find myself now, and that's where my work finds itself today.
Well, I'm 75 years old, so I think, okay, how much longer do I have, right? So I'm now thinking about the spirit, so I'm doing things that are related to spirituality, but then I look back at my work and it was always there. I just didn't recognize it, but now I do. So I'm currently doing a mural. I have you come and visit. I have a studio and a gallery in South Texas, Kingsville, and it's a historic home that I bought and I restored. It was built in 1907. And so Kingsville was developed or founded in 1904, so it's pretty old. So, so I have a wall, and I'm doing using the codices again because I see a lot of power and information in the codices that I didn't see before. So I have Tree of Life from the codices, and I actually appropriated from the Mixtec culture, and they believe that the man would emerge from the tree, that humanity was created from the tree. So I have a Tree of Life from depicted and appropriated from the great goddess of Teotihuacan, and on one side is Adam and Eve, and on the other side is the Holy Family, but it's all with the codices all around. So that's what I'm working on at this moment. But I feel that in my time now, I need to think about the spirit. So that's what I'm doing.
To like add to how even though like our artwork might have started in one space and then it's evolving into this other spaces or multiple spaces, it's sort of like really pertinent always because the world is sort of not changing. Like it's the work is always relevant because the world kind of hasn't evolved. So like thinking about scholarship and indigenous scholarship and the ways that we can honor that is really, whenever I see like all the universities being bombed in the Middle East and Palestine, I'm thinking about all that scholarship that's been obliterated and how it lives on with people and artists and just how important that is. So in that way too, in a way, it's art becomes scholarship. Yeah.
Well, I want to add that I've always used the image of the Virgen de Guadalupe, and her imagery is like universal. Like she has the cosmos on her tilma. She has now they found out that her dress is a codice, so the indigenous could read it, and that's why they had massive transformation to Christianity because they understood her dress and her apparition. Her name was an indigenous name that meant I am the mother of the God of the Lord of the universe. So I think that all those things we did not know, but the indigenous knew it. And I think that if in my situation, I feel that indigenous is very important to me and it's part of me. And so I still incorporate that in my work.
Thank you. What a beautiful and generative last question. Thank you so much. Cesáreo?
Sure. Want to thank all of you and all of you at home on Zoom for attending this fifth and final U.S. Latinx program. And we hope that you continue to support the arts, the artists, culture, and continue to transform, as it's been expressed here today, transform people and give them other ideas. Thank you very much.